Hello and welcome to this ReClass presentation of parameters and arguments in C#. This also covers excuse me, the syntactual corrections that we made as far as what a code block is and the importance of kind of making a code skeleton before you just start into things as far as making your code, making your methods. Alright, so let's go into this presentation that we showed during class. Syntax. Alright, so we talked about the fundamentals of coding and making fields, variables. We're not going to get to that. Will be the next class, and that will be probably after this presentation as far as chronologic order. So this is a code block. Now we can see here, now this is a mistake. Actually, I'm tired of seeing that actually. Alright, fixed. Okay, so this is the representation of a class definition. Now, every time that you actually create a class inside of Unity, you're going to see this kind of thing. You're going to see a class, this is public class, and then the name of the class or the name of the file, and then what it inherits from. Now this part here we haven't gotten this far, so just don't worry about it, leave it alone. So inside of Unity we can create a C# script. We'll call it syntax. Actually I already have one. So I'll call this screencast syntax. Go ahead and open this up. And so the organization of this is saying, okay, this is a public class, so it can be instantiated from anywhere. So I can drag this on to pretty much any object inside of Unity. Now, this is where the class starts. This is where the class ends. So everything in between these curly braces is what defines the behavior of an instance of my class, whatever this name is. Okay, it can be Bob, it can be Rico Suave, it doesn't matter what it is. This defines all of the behaviors. Now by behaviors I mean all of the functions or methods that a my class can do, as well as all of the fields or data that a my class can manipulate or use. Same thing applies for this new class that I just made. It says the same thing, public class, and then here's the name of the class, and here are the functions that exist for this class. Now you'll see here's your opening curly brace, here's your closing curly brace. This is the definition of what the class is. Keep in mind that if you want to know where a class ends and begins, the only thing you have to do is select next to the curly brace and it will show you where it ends. Same thing applies for functions. We can click here, it shows us where the function ends. Conversely, if we want to click a closing curly brace, it will show you where it begins. Okay? This area above will be for fields, and we'll get to that at a later date. Alright, same thing applies for code blocks with methods. First thing is the return type. So if this method runs, what does it return back to you? The analogy I make with this is if I say I want you to add some numbers together, and I say, okay, add these numbers. So then you say, okay, what numbers? I say 2 plus 3, and you return to me the number 5. Okay? So that would be a return type. Now, this is the name of the method. This is where you will place any kind of parameters that it will be expecting. And you see the same thing inside of your actual code. Okay? When you're actually calling these methods, you say the name of the class, period, and then the name of the function you're trying to call. Inside of the parameters, you outline arguments that you're actually going to be using. So say, for example, we make our own method. Let's say it, my method. And this is what I was talking about making a code skeleton. Put all of your syntax first. Your return type, your name, your parentheses for your arguments, and then your curly braces for your code block. So everything between here and here defines what my method will do. So right now we can just simply say debug.log. Sorry, it should not be a string. So we'll say debug log, and inside of here, my method is working. So whenever this method is actually called, it will just simply display to the console whatever's inside of this. Okay. When you look this up, you'll see that this is the type of data. This is the name of the parameter. Now, this isn't really important because this is actually defined by Unity. Just whenever we actually call a method, whatever we put inside of the parentheses is an argument that we're sending to this method. Now, this method will require that you actually provide information that it is expecting. If you don't provide it, you will get an error, like so. Let's say we take away what's inside of the debug log method call. We switch over to Unity. No overload for method log takes 0 arguments. So what that's telling you is that you're trying to call a method and not providing any arguments, but there's no definition for any method that actually of the name log that takes 0 arguments. If you look this up on the Unity reference guide or the reference API, scripting API, we'll go and do a search for debug log. And what this is going to tell us is that there's actually 2 methods called debug log. These are called overloads. One expects 2 arguments, one expects 1 argument. And we can see that right here. We have 2 different versions. We have a log that accepts 1 argument. We have a log that accepts 2 arguments separated by a comma, but nothing that accepts 0 arguments. So that's what that error message is saying. Okay? Don't forget the terminator. Okay, that's going into fields. We'll come back to that at a later date, as I said previously. Alright, so how do we take advantage of making our own parameters and arguments? Well, that's pretty simple to do. We just, inside of these parentheses, we state 2 things. We say the name of the parameter as far as this method is concerned, and the type of data it's going to be. So let's say that we're going to expect a string, and we'll call it S. Now remember that S is more or less a localized variable, and it only exists inside of my method. Okay, this method. And let's say that we're going to actually take advantage of whatever information is passed into this method. We're going to take advantage of this parameter that we just set up. So instead of debugging a hard-coded hello message or whatever, we're going to debug whatever information is passed to this S parameter. So up inside of start, we can simply say now my method. And we're going to pass in hello there. So we're going to pass along the string. It's going to go into this parameter, and then it will get debugged. Okay. Return types. So the first thing whenever you see a method, it says, well, these ones say void, which just means it doesn't return anything. But you can have other methods. For example, this method will return an integer. So what we can do is, and this is jumping ahead just a little bit, but we can set up, for example, an integer, my integer. This is just making a variable, a field called my integer, and its type is integer. That's all we're doing right there. And again, we'll get to that later, but I need that for now. Okay, so I can say, for example, whenever I say add numbers, let's say I provide an integer num1 and an integer num2. So I provide two numbers. And what this will do is say return num1 plus num2. So whenever I call this method, whatever two numbers that it's passed, it will return the sum of those numbers. But the thing is, I don't just call add numbers. I don't just say add numbers. Because it won't really do anything. I mean, it will actually call the function, but nothing is actually done. We don't take whatever value this is and return it back up here. Okay, so what we can do is say, for example, we're going to set my int is equal to 5. Okay, or we can say, well, what else is 5? Well, we can set my int actually equal to add numbers 2 and 3. So it takes this and says, okay, run this method. This method is like, okay, well, I need two numbers. So you provide those two numbers. 2 goes into the first parameter spot. 3 goes into the second parameter spot. So it adds these numbers together, then returns the sum. So whatever these are, add them together, and then store it where? Inside of this. So this is equal to whatever this returns. So that's what this first thing indicates, is the type of information that this is going to return. If it says void, it just means that it just does something. It doesn't actually return a value. It just performs some kind of task. Now, return types can be many different things. They can be strings. They can be floats. Well, they can't be floats, but they can be a float. Okay? So hopefully that clears up a little bit of the mystery about what that void word means at the beginning of methods. So that concludes this lesson on parameters and arguments inside of Unity. To recap, remember that whenever you are actually setting up a method, if you're saying you're going to be expecting data, you say the type and give it a name that will only exist inside of this method. This is setting up a parameter. Whenever you pass that information into that parameter, the data that you pass is referred to as an argument. The first, well, not necessarily the first, but before the name of the method, you have a return type. If it says void, nothing is returned. If it has a type, it must return something of that type. Okay? If you were directed here from me, from my class, I hope this clears up any doubts that you have. Be prepared to use this information during class. If you came here from a different source, I hope that you found this information to be valuable and clear up any doubts you may have had. More videos will follow if they are not already included in my timeline on YouTube. If you have any other doubts, watch those videos and be sure to keep following along if you want to learn more about programming in C# inside of Unity. Thank you and have a good day.